Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hal Shurtleff. I'm the New England coordinator for the John Birch Society. I want to welcome you to our press conference here at the beautiful state capitol in Concord, New Hampshire. And before I bring up our speaker, Dr. Duke Pesta, I just want to mention that Dr. Duke Pesta has been traveling over 30 states, actually 32, in the last year or so, to discuss this subject, dangers of the Common Core, dangers to American liberty and education. And he has given several presentations, actually 5 or 6 in the last couple of days in this area, and tonight he'll be at the Wyndham Town Hall, Wyndham, New Hampshire. And we certainly hope that he'll come back in the fall, as usually he'll come to an area and there'll be so many other groups of people from other groups wanting to come back, so we hope that will happen here. Dr. Duke Pesta is a native of Ohio, Cleveland, and he has been teaching in college for over 20 years. He's a Shakespearean expert on William Shakespeare. He actually believes that Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. Can you believe that? Anyway, he is the academic director of the Freedom Project Education, and I would say from my 4 or 5 days listening to his presentations, probably one of the top experts on the subject of Common Core. And so let's bring up Dr. Duke Pesta right now. Dr. Pesta.
Thank you all for having me here today. It's good to see a good turnout on this warm spring day, late summer day, and we appreciate the people of New Hampshire for allowing us to be here today. New Hampshire is our 32nd state, and in about 10 months we've been in 32 states across this union, and we've been talking about the issue of Common Core. One of the things we so greatly admire in the Midwest where I'm from about a state like New Hampshire is that motto, live free or die. New Hampshire has a long tradition of defending individual rights, property rights, the rights of moms and dads to be able to educate their kids the way they want them educated. Common Core is going to challenge that right. The live free or die state must begin the path of removing Common Core from New Hampshire schools. When we think about what Common Core is, we recognize that very little teacher input was involved in the crafting of the Common Core state standards. We also know that corporate interests, succeeding corporate interests, have been behind and driving the state standards. We call them the Common Core state standards. And the reality is that the states had little to no input whatsoever on the writing or the implementation of these standards. We care about state and local control for our schools. Only your teachers, the teachers in your classrooms, your local school boards, your local school districts, only they know what are the best ways to educate your children. Whenever we get these kind of big government takeovers, in this case education, we find that the state and local ability to impact what goes on in our classrooms with our kids is severely compromised. We have suffered through, in a state like New Hampshire, 12 years of No Child Left Behind. Big government federalization of education. And in that 12 years, we've seen our children's test scores go down. We've seen our children's performance go down. As big corporate interests like the Broad and the Gates Foundations, Achieve, Inc., ALEC, as big corporate industries whose job it is to control and produce curriculum for our schools, to keep churning out new textbooks, to get more and more say in how our kids are tested and what our kids learn. We find ourselves in a difficult position. The best way to help New Hampshire kids is to allow New Hampshire teachers and New Hampshire moms and dads come together to work beyond a culture of testing. What benefit is the high-stakes testing of the last 20 years? The broad national standards for education that keep getting set, that our kids are unable to meet, that our teachers are unable to meet, standards that are gauged and measured, tests that are graded by education corporations and companies like Pearson Publishing. The idea that big corporate interests and large federal conglomerates can better educate our children than we can. Those days are past. After 50 years of failed big government outcome-based education, we have reached the point now where the only answer, the only remaining option for us in states like New Hampshire is to get back to what made our country great. It has been pointed out many times that our country has become great in the backs of men and women who were educated in one-room schoolhouses, as Dr. Mary Calabria of New York says. People educated in one-room schoolhouses have gone on to create the greatest generation of Americans, to create unequaled wealth and prosperity and opportunity. And over the last 40 years, we've been told that the education system that created those men and women was a failure. But who told us this? It wasn't our teachers who told us this. It wasn't our schools that told us this. It was education corporate interests who have created tests to verify in their minds and according to their flawed testing systems that our schools had failed America for the last 200 years. In reality, America was doing very well in education. Our schools were among the best in the world. And along come these corporate interests to convince us that our schools have failed and to institute this rigorous and meaningless high-stakes testing. For the last 40 years, our kids have suffered this way. The tests tell us nothing, and the new round of tests that Common Core is going to bring in are going to be more stringent, more arbitrary, and less transparent for moms and dads. Already in New York State, a state that's had Common Core for 2 years longer than we've had it in New Hampshire, we find that the tests that are being used to measure Common Core performance are not available for teachers to look at. They're not available for teachers to grade. That when the tests are graded by private corporations like Pearson, the results are released, but not the tests themselves. How in the world can we believe our kids are doing poorly when we can't see the tests? How in the world can we trust tests that are not created by educational experts and professionals? These are the circumstances we face with Common Core. To say nothing of the fact that after the initial buy-in, after the federal government doles out its money to get everybody on board with this paradigm, that no sooner do they do that than, as they've done with every other big government education program, they will pull much of that financial support and leave states left to cover billions and billions and billions of dollars to implement and support and prop this program. And what will happen to our state and local school boards? If this becomes fully federalized, if the Common Core is put in from top to bottom as the ambitions are, then what becomes of your state and local education authorities? They become mere administrative agents of a federal education program. We've seen this before. When Obamacare became the law of the land, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, the states that are required to set up exchanges, they do not have the opportunity to offer you something different. They merely administer the big federal health care program. How can it not be the same thing with regards to education? Do you honestly believe that a big Washington bureaucracy is going to better be able to address the immediate needs of New Hampshire school children than your teachers are, your moms and dads are? We think about this across the board. Right now, even under No Child Left Behind, that failed previous big government iteration of this kind of education, which Common Core supersedes, even under No Child Left Behind. If you had a problem in your schools with a book or an assignment or a test, you could opt your kids out. You could go to your teachers and opt your kids out, and it was as simple as that. But once this program, Common Core, becomes fully implemented at the federal level, how do you in New Hampshire opt your kids out of tests or out of questions or out of assignments that are going to be covered on national tests that are geared to meeting the standard? Right now you can opt your kid out with a simple word. If Common Core gets its way, you will not be able to opt kids out. Not in your state schools, not in your local schools. You're going to have to go to Washington, D.C. to begin to get your kids out. And let's keep in mind, in the 2 years that we've had Common Core, of the 46 states that initially took Common Core, 28 are now scrambling to get out of it after a year and a half. We have already, 4 states refused to take the standards to begin with. Another 4 have already pulled out. 3 more are on the way to pull out by the end of this month. What is the rush, New Hampshire, to adopt a set of content standards that other states in the Union, states who've had it longer than New Hampshire has, are already struggling and striving to get themselves out of? There are over 300 pieces of legislation in 40 different American states urging the complete repeal or a dramatic modification of Common Core and its parameters. States like Indiana and Oklahoma and South Carolina join the most recent list of states that failed to take or rejected altogether the standards. In states like New York, Florida, and Kentucky, rollout states for Common Core. States that have seen 2 years already of testing on Common Core. The results have been an absolute disaster. In New York State, test scores in reading and math fell from the upper 70s down into the 30s. And teachers found out immediately that their freedom to teach what they wanted to teach, what they needed to teach, was curtailed by the standards. As Bill Gates himself pointed out, the architect of the standards, the man who paid for them and paid for their implementation, $2.5 billion the Gates Foundation has spent buying public education in this country. And as Bill Gates himself said back in 2009, when the tests line up with the standards, the Common Core standards, the curriculum must follow. Back in 2009, 5 years ago, Bill Gates told you that when the tests finally kick in, your teachers will have to teach exclusively and only to what the tests demand. This has been the promise of big education. And now that New Hampshire is on the cusp in the next school year of taking their first national state tests, can we afford to sacrifice this kind of control for corporate and big government interests? I mentioned the 3 states that took Common Core early: New York, Florida, and Kentucky. All 3 of these states want out now. The New York State Teachers Union, in January of this year, voted unanimously to oppose the further implementation of Common Core state standards. The National Education Association, the largest teachers union in the country, called the rollout of Common Core completely botched and called for a complete rewrite, including allowing teachers to have actual input on the tests that will measure their performance. And then we have, in May of last month, May 7th of last month, the Chicago Teachers Union, President Obama's own backyard, and one of the most radical and progressive teachers union in the country, unilaterally called to remove Common Core from Chicago schools. In a dramatically worded letter, Karen Lewis, the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, slams high-stakes testing, slams the federal intrusion of Common Core into state and local affairs. It slams the takeover, the federal takeover of education. These are extreme progressive groups who have joined forces now with conservative voices like the John Birch Society and many others who have stood on the front lines of opposing Common Core for years now. We need to rethink Common Core. We need to get a state like New Hampshire should be in the vanguard of beginning to remove these standards in the name of teacher autonomy, in the names of our kids' futures. We ask you, we urge you today on this beautiful summer day to please consider doing everything you can to help the state, to help advocates and activists in the state, to begin to lobby Congress, to begin to lobby your assembly, to begin to lobby your governor, to remove the Common Core state standards and turn education back over to New Hampshire citizens who understand what's best for your children. We call on this today, and we urge you to get behind our crusade across the country, a crusade that's bearing tremendous fruit, as 8 states now have rejected it altogether. More will be coming, and there are 40 other states seriously considering repeal or modification. This is the time, before the roots of Common Core are sunk any deeper, before the corporate interests buy more of our freedoms, before the federal government appropriates more of our liberties to itself with regards to how we teach our kids and what we tell our kids and the kind of kids we want to raise in a land dedicated to freedom and liberty. Get behind this now, moms and dads. This is the single biggest existential threat to your ability to teach your kids your faith, your values, your methodologies, your work ethic. This is the single biggest existential threat to your children to come down the road in the last 50 years. This is the time. All it takes is a concerted number of moms and dads to stand up. In states like Indiana and Oklahoma, states that have, and South Carolina, states that have pulled out recently, it's only been a small percentage of moms and dads who've been activated, who've come together to fight this fight, and they have succeeded in removing Common Core from those states. What does New York know, New Hampshire, that you don't? They've had 2 years of Common Core, and New York wants out. Florida, Kentucky, states where this is rolled out earlier, are scrambling desperately to try to scale it back, to modify it. Teachers unions all across the country join with the Occupy Wall Street movement, join with conservative education groups from across the country. This is a nationwide, bipartisan effort to remove Common Core. We recognize an unholy alliance between an overreaching federal government and a small group of crony capitalists who have conspired to hijack American education. New Hampshire, you deserve better. New Hampshire, your children deserve better. You have educated your kids in the spirit of live free or die. Well, this is one of those live free or die moments, New Hampshire. We encourage you today. We support you. My state of Wisconsin, Oklahoma, South Carolina, the states that have begun the process of pulling out, we stand by you. Red states, blue states, purple states, we stand by you in helping you. Call upon us to help you, provide any leadership we can to augment the wonderful leadership you already have in the state. It's time to remove Common Core. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Just a few resources. Dr. Pesta is the Academic Director of Freedom Project Education, and your website is fpeusa.org. So fpeusa.org. All kinds of wonderful resources. Also, a couple things I want to recommend too. There's a 1-hour DVD, 56 minutes, with Dr. Duke Pesta and his colleague Mary Black. This is available on YouTube. And thousands of these copies have been distributed around the country as well. And a reprint from the New American Magazine came out several months ago. It's called Common Core, A Scheme to Rewrite American Education. There's 2 great articles in here, and you'll see something that's, people almost can't believe it when they hear about it, but there's these devices that are used to actually monitor a child's response that is being promoted by our federal government Department of Education. So then this reprint is also available in a PDF format, or if you go right to thenewamerican.com. So I want to thank you for coming, and God bless you, and God bless the great state of New Hampshire.